Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start out tonight with a brief mention of Verna Lisi, who died recently at the age of 78. Verna Lisi was one of these European actresses who came to the United States in the late 50s and 60s and tried to recreate the Marilyn Monroe model. She was gorgeous, a blonde from Italy. She was voluptuous and sensuous, and that got her roles with a lot of the big male stars of the time. She's best known for coming out of a cake in a 1965 movie with Jack Lemmon, How to Murder Your Wife. She also starred with Tony Curtis. She starred with Anthony Quinn and Frank Sinatra. She was also on the cover of Esquire magazine in 1966 when Esquire was just becoming the hippest magazine in the United States. Here's a brief snip of her in 1966 in the movie Assault on a Queen. It's not a great movie. It's sort of a guilty pleasure of mine where she stars with Frank Sinatra. Something about diving for stolen treasure, and they want to hijack a British warship, and Anthony Franciosa plays a guy impersonating a British officer, but he gets tripped up because he says he's a lieutenant, and the captain of the British ship knows he should have said he was a lieutenant. A lot of silly stuff, but Verna Lisi looked really good in the movie.
Well, Mr. Bertain, by the name Trent said I'd find you in here.
You found me.
I'm Victor Rossiter.
Did you feel a little left out?
My name is Rosa Lucchesi.
Yeah. Trent also said that you were a good diver, and for a price you'd put on a suit.
For a good price, I'd put on a suit. But not one of Trench's suits. It would take more money than you've got, more of a death wish than I've got.
We intend to order a new diver suit.
Haven't you had enough? You lost one diver today.
A galleon went down 3 miles from here. It carried the gold bullion worth millions of dollars. Please, look at this.
What part of Italy are you from, Miss Lucchesi?
Naples.
Must be beautiful there this time of year.
Imagine her drinking red wine with a 50-cent sharpie like him.
She's a beautiful woman. She walks well.
Quite right. She walks well.
Yeah, she was beautiful, but her thick accent hurt her, and then eventually they discovered younger actresses. She went back to Italy, and she actually became a very respectable actress and won some awards in European movies. But for a brief time at the end of the Hollywood studio system, she was one of the European bombshells who came to Hollywood. We're going to turn now to Richard C. Hottelet, who died recently at the age of 97. He was the last of the Murrow Boys, the CBS News correspondents who worked under Edward R. Murrow during World War II. Murrow Boys were about 10 reporters. They were all male except for one, Mary Margaret Breckinridge. They actually started before World War II, but they made their names during World War II. The most notable were William Shire, Eric Sevareid, Howard K. Smith, and they and their professional descendants made CBS News what it was during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Actually, Richard C. Hottelet was with CBS News the longest. He was a correspondent until 1985. Here's CBS News on the death of Richard Hottelet.
A storied era in broadcast journalism has come to an end. Former CBS News correspondent Richard C. Hottelet has died. He was 97 and the last of the Murrow Boys. Hottelet was one of the legendary CBS reporters hired by Edward R. Murrow to cover World War II, and he came with experience, including a 1938 encounter with Hitler.
There was Adolf, bright blue eyes. He was another human being. He was pretty lousy at that.
During the war, Hottelet was held in solitary by the Gestapo for 4 months on trumped-up spy charges. He survived the downing of his plane. He parachuted out, and he covered D-Day.
The Allied forces landed in France early this morning. I watched the first landing barges hit the beach exactly on the minute of H hour.
Back in the States, Hottelet worked the diplomatic beat at the UN.
The United States wants to bring the Palestinians into the Middle East peace negotiations.
His advice to young journalists: play it straight, don't tell them what you think or feel, tell them what you know. And we all benefited for it.
This is Richard C. Hottelet, CBS News.
Yeah, he was one of the guys who covered Khrushchev banging his shoe at the UN. Here he is talking about being one of the first reporters to be let in to see the concentration camps at the end of the war.
When Ed Murrow went to Buchenwald, he was so shocked by what he saw. Well, I decided I wanted to go east and see for myself what there was to be seen. In Berlin, right after the Potsdam Conference, which was in mid-August of 1945, we faked some credentials. We had to have stamps. The man who helped us manufacture them said, all the Russians want is stamps. That's official. So we had registered mail, do not open, and that sort of thing, postage stamp. I said, well, it has to be signed by somebody. And so we signed it, finally signed it, A. Lincoln. We went east to Warsaw with these phony documents. Had no trouble with the Russians, had no trouble with the Poles. But near Krakow, I wanted to see Auschwitz concentration camp. The Russians had blown up the gas chambers by then. But the barracks were there, and the barbed wire, and the office of the commandant, who had pictures, the skin tattoos of inmates that they had cut off them, presumably after they died. One could get a sense of what it was. I remember the people slept on had long barracks, and they slept on shelves. They had a sort of a ground floor, they slept on the ground. And I remember these shelves were all sort of rust brown. And we had a pole with us, and I said, what funny color? They said, yes, it's all bed bugs, all blood from bed bugs.
That's the kind of detail that great reporters are known for. We're going to move on now to our feature tonight, Mandy Rice-Davies, who died recently at the age of 70. Mandy Rice-Davies, along with Christine Keeler, was one of the two girls involved in the most notorious British sex scandal of the 20th century, the scandal that brought down the conservative government, the Profumo affair. And we talked about the Profumo affair a couple of years ago when Johnny Edgecombe died, who was a peripheral figure. Basically, Mandy was a teenager who was working in a British cabaret club. She met Christine Keeler there, and they both fell under the friendship of Stephen Ward, who was an osteopath with very high connections and was almost certainly working for MI5 as a spy and attempting to turn out a Soviet naval attaché who was really a Russian spy by the name of Eugenie Ivanov. So Ward set Ivanov up by having him sleep with Christine Keeler. It was your classic honey trap, but it went bad when Stephen Ward brought Mandy Rice-Davies and Christine Keeler to a party at Lord Astor's summer home. John Profumo, the Secretary of War, which is essentially the British Secretary of Defense, saw Christine Keeler swimming naked in the pool, and he started an affair with her, and the whole thing got very complicated. And when it finally became public, John Profumo lied about it in Parliament. When the truth about it came out, he had to resign. Eventually, the Conservative governor, Harold Macmillan, had to resign. They needed a scapegoat, so they made Stephen Ward the scapegoat. Of course, Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice-Davies were called in to testify. Christine Keeler wasn't good in public, but Mandy Rice-Davies was great in public, and in fact, she uttered one of the famous quotes of the 20th century, which made it into the Oxford Book of Quotations. And the whole thing was evidence of the decadence of the British post-war conservative culture. Here's Matthew Bannister from the BBC4 Last Word on Mandy Rice-Davies.
Mandy Rice-Davies was the former showgirl at the centre of the notorious Profumo scandal of the 1960s. She and her friend Christine Keeler were introduced into influential political circles by the osteopath Stephen Ward. They went to parties at Cliveden, the stately home owned by Lord Astor, who was alleged to have slept with Mandy. When it emerged that Christine had slept with the Conservative Secretary of State for War, John Profumo, and also with a Russian naval attaché, there was a scandal which cost Profumo his career. Stephen Ward was put on trial and found guilty of living on immoral earnings, although he committed suicide before the verdict was handed down. Mandy Rice-Davies gave evidence at the trial. Last year, she narrated a Radio 4 drama about her life.
Christine was one of the showgirls. She didn't like me at first, which is why she hid my top. But there was no way I was going to let her get one up on me.
The producer-director of that drama was Kate McCall. She'd originally approached Mandy about a different project.
She still looked incredibly glamorous, and she was very friendly, she was very open. And as we talked about this other project, I started to think, actually, I don't think she's ever really told her story in her own words. And it kind of felt this is the time for her to have her say about it.
A huge crowd had gathered. I'd heard on the radio that they'd booed and jeered at Christine as she went in. So naturally, I was very apprehensive. I got out of the car and was greeted by popping flashbulbs. I was about to put my head down and make a dash for the entrance. And then I thought, no, that's what they want, the powers that be. So I lifted my head, and as I walked in, I smiled and waved. The effect was instant. Everybody smiled and waved back.
Mandy had a terrific sense of humour, so she was able to laugh about it to a degree. But she was very, very young. That's the thing that, it's easy to forget. She was 16 when she left home and ran away to London. She was 18 at the time of the trial. And if you think about somebody at that age having to sort of stand up in what must have been a very, very intimidating place and have all the sort of power of the establishment ranged against them, she did pretty well.
And to have the self-possession to come out with that famous quote as well. How did that quote happen?
The judge at the trial was the same judge who had tried the Lady Chatterley case a year earlier, and he put it to Mandy that Lord Astor had denied that he'd had any intimacy, I think was how he put it, with her. She came back with, well, he would, wouldn't he?
Mandy Rice-Davies was a fantastically interesting character. She married well several times, became a friend with Lady Thatcher, and her inimitable style, she described the rest of her life as a slow descent into respectability. Well, I'm going to close tonight with Larry Henley, who died at the age of 77. And Larry Henley was a fascinating guy because he had two different careers. His first career was in the 60s when he was the falsetto lead singer of a group called the Newbeats, which in 1964 and 1965 had two hits. They were one of the only American groups to go high on the charts during the British invasion. The first one in late 1964 is a fairly well-known song. It's called Bread and Butter, and he's the falsetto lead. Here they are singing it on Shindig.
The Newbeats. He likes bread and butter, and he likes toasted jam. That's why his baby feeds him, and he's a loving man.
Their follow-up, not as big, was Run Baby Run in early 1965, and here they sing it on Hullabaloo. Well, eventually the British invasion got the Newbeats, and Larry Henley became a songwriter. In 1982, he wrote a song with a guy named Jeff Silber, and my man Lou Rawls did a disco version of it, which became a moderate hit.
You ever know that you are my hero? Everything that I would like to be. I can fly higher, higher than an eagle. I said, you are the wind beneath my wings.
In the 1980s, Gladys Knight did a pretty good cover version of this also.
Did you ever know that you're my hero? And everything I'd like to be. I can fly higher, higher than an eagle. With you as the wind beneath my wings.
This is such a great song. Country people did it. Judy Collins did it. One of my favorite versions is by Dame Shirley Bassey, the Goldfinger Lady.
Did you ever know that you're my hero? And everything I would like to be. I can fly higher than an eagle. 'Cause you are the wind beneath my wings.
I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and tech advisor, Sid Tepps. Larry Henley's song was used in the 1988 movie Beaches. It won the 1989 Grammy Song of the Year and 1989 Record of the Year. It went platinum. It's one of the top 50 tunes in America's cinema in the past 100 years, named by the American Film Institute, and there have only been 3 in the last 25 years. And I think it's easily better than the other 2, Fight the Power by Public Enemy and My Heart Will Go On by Celine Dion. So for my money, Wind Beneath My Wings by Larry Henley is the greatest movie tune of the last 25 years. But of course, the reason for that is the version used in the movie, sung by the divine Miss M. Bette Midler, the definitive version.
Did you ever know that you're my hero? You're everything I wish I could be. I would fly high.